talk about the new transaction systems that are coming into play. So there's going to be a lot more options to way you can spend your money and track your money and pay for things. Now this is going to come through electronic wallets, and it's going to relate to Bitcoin and electronic currencies, but a lot of the changes are coming through from the way you can pay for things, and people have already seen probably the ad on TV where the guy has a Fitbit and he goes and pays for his sandwich on the Fitbit. That's one way of transacting things, and through your mobile phone. So we'll go through a lot of those things over the time. So just a bit of background on currencies. Probably we all know that over time we've had currencies. Every major civilization has been developed since ancient Babylon, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome. They've all had their currencies, and you really need currencies to make a civilized society work. And the reason for that is because before that was barter. Barter meant that if you were an egg producer and you produced eggs, you'd go onto the market, you'd have 3 eggs and you might want to get some milk, so you'd barter 3 eggs for 1 pint of milk, and then you'd transact that, and if you wanted some cloth, you would transact so many eggs for some cloth. And that's not a bad way of starting, but the problem with that is if you wanted to store up your eggs and buy a big hat or something, you're going to have a problem, because it's not a store of wealth, because eggs go off and they're not going to be worth anything to people after, say, 2 or 3 weeks. So they're not divisible either, so if you only want to sell half an egg to someone to get only a bit of milk, well, you only can't really sell half an egg, that sort of thing. So it's not divisible. And the other thing with barter is that you can't store the wealth generally in commodities unless it's something like gold or copper or zinc or lead or tin. So there has been a whole history of going from coins that are really just cockle shells through to florins. Obviously it came from Florence, and we probably remember that we used to call what we call the 20 pence coin a florin, going back to that, so it's got a long history there. Then we got to the first banknotes, and of course really when you start to get banknotes, you moved away from having the value of the currency being backed by a commodity, because when you had these coins, you had either bronze or copper or lead or gold or silver as a currency to back it up, because you could then, okay, if you didn't get your money's worth out of the coin, you could always melt it down and use it in metal. So that's the early stages of coins and currency. The only problem is that it doesn't increase in value through interest if you hold your money in cash. It's dependent on the country. If you have a poorly run country like Venezuela, where they've been chronically mismanaging their economy, the value of their currency just goes through the floor, and you can't buy anything outside the country. People like the old Rhodesia, where it's Mugabe is, the people have now actually gone, because inflation is so high, they're actually using US dollars over there. And once it's stolen, you lose it, and you've got to keep it in a safe place all the time. But the key thing with currencies is that if you ever look at your notes, it says on the back here that it's legal tender in Australia. So what does that mean? It means you can go to anyone in Australia and use this to buy something. You can't use US dollars, you can't use UK pounds. It just says that that currency is what we use in Australia to get and buy and sell goods. So the key thing is we still use a lot of, thank you Richard, next one. Yeah. We still use a lot of cash in Australia, but a lot of people now in America are not even using cash. Now it's because they're a little bit more advanced with their electronic systems using mobile phones, and we'll come on to how that comes about, because we can now get rid of our notes and coins, and also eventually get rid of our credit cards. So use of cash, yes, use it basically for the smaller denominations now. A lot of businesses now use credit cards because it's simpler for their accounting. It's also safer for them, and it's also the tax office is very interested in people who just use cash in their businesses because they are obviously putting some under the counter. So we probably will see the use of cash decline further over time as we use electronic means to pay for things. You probably heard in India they've banned the very high denomination notes in India because India was using currency, their cash was used as to be under the counter transactions. People were buying houses and doing lots of the transactions with these high denomination notes. So the President of India, Modi, just banned and made them cancel them and said they weren't they're worthless overnight. And it meant that, well, they had a certain number of days to go and cash them. Of course, there was a bit of a queue out of the banks to try and cash them all, but all this money came out of under the mattress, let's put it that way, because their economy was missing out. The government was missing out on their taxation by people using all these wads of cash to pay for things, whether it was houses, cars, all the things in the economy were actually being bought with these huge high denomination notes, and that's what you might have heard just recently. They're talking about cancelling the $100 note in Australia because of that reason, because the people who use it, you'd hardly see a $100 note in use. Well, it's because people are hoarding them. There's a huge amount of $100 notes in circulation, but they're sitting in bank vaults in people's houses, basically. They're used for drug dealing, they're used for under-the-counter transactions, and that's why they're trying to say that those denominations, if they cut them back to the $50 and $20 notes, it would be much bulkier to do, much more harder to do those transactions. Cheques, only 6,500 cheques were processed last year in Australia, so it's pretty much going out the door. And it just sort of shows that every product has a product lifetime. You know that everything eventually goes into the waste bin as far as being useful. They're expensive, they're for banks to process, they obviously have transaction times to get processed through the system, and not immediate, so probably they will disappear and the banks will just say we won't issue them anymore in the next year or so. So checkbooks will be redundant, and you can see the decline of cheques in Australia for the last, this is 2006, it might be 2008, I can't see it, but anyway, huge decline in cheques, and that's going out the window. They can be forged, of course, and declined if there's not enough money, if you have an account, if you have another transaction comes in on top of it. You get a fee if you have a dishonest fee if you present a cheque, and technically it's a fraud if you present a cheque where you don't have the money. So obviously the younger people don't really use cheques. It's more in our generation where we're used to cheques in the past, but they're declining obviously over time. Bank card, if you remember bank card, 1974, who remembers getting a bank card in the mail? And well, this was the start of our credit card systems, and it was created by all the banks in Australia. The major banks got together and created a bank card. Of course, it's now been superseded by Visa and MasterCard. And of course, it had a good lifetime, and it's now obviously obsolete, but it had a good run in Australia for its payment system. And now we've got Visa and MasterCard in. And of course we can now pay things by PayWave under $100. So that's the new system. But there's another system out there. We'll talk about a number of systems out there. This is the Apple Square, where transactions for retailers, so if you're a plumber or a tradesman, you can have your mobile phone pay for, the client pays for their service through this little icon here. You stick it into their mobile phone, and that can take the payment from the customer. The only problem is that the new version of the mobile phones now don't have that socket to put it in. So within a very short time that's going out of date. But I haven't seen anyone use that yet, so it mustn't have really caught on. Of course, we all know about mobile phones, and of course now the next generation will be using your mobile phone to pay for things. And Has anyone seen people use mobile phones to pay things?
Yes.
Occasionally I see it, but I don't use it myself. But when you think about it, it's probably much safer than your credit card, because someone could pick up your credit card, and because it can tap anything with under $100, they can tap around Civic or Woden and pay for lots of things before you even know about it, if you lose it. So technically that's not as safe as having it on a mobile phone, because at least you've got to have a password to get into your mobile phone, and if you have a password with your fingerprint on it, that helps as well. The second thing, you've then got to get into the app on the phone to actually then activate the payment. So you've got sort of literally 2 levels of security there before you can pay it on your phone. And also then you can then check on your own, when the payment's done, of course you can check it against your bank account as well. So you can then you can go to the app to look at your credit card statements, so you can see how much has come out. You can look at your bank card, against your bank account if you do a debit card. So it's going at another step further with security, I think, and also keeping an eye on what's actually happening with your own finances. So credit cards have been great. They're portable and easy to use. Can be stolen, of course, but you get the biggest advantage for a lot of people has been getting their flyby points, but they've been gradually being reduced anyway. So in the past, you could get up to 2 points on an Amex. Now the Amex with NAB anyway have been cancelled, so you can't even use your Amex. And the Visa card's only 1 point. So you've really got to be able to, you've really got to be using a lot of them to get anywhere on the flights these days. And if you do use flights versus buying the options, you can buy things like toasters and mixed masters, all sort of things. On those points, they don't actually convert very well. If you do the sums, the actual the flyby points using it for buying a flight is actually much better conversion if you ever want to convert them over. So you've got the debit cards and the credit cards, been around for a long while, and we obviously know the advantages of that. So we've used the credit cards pretty consistently because it's an easy way of paying for things. $27 billion each month goes through their systems, and it's a very efficient system because in the past, of course, if you paid for cash, you went to a retailer, you paid cash, they had to make sure they got the right amount of cash, then they counted up at the end of the day, take it to the bank, put it through the banking system. A lot of manual handling. It's very much more efficient to use, obviously, electronic means to pay for things. Very, very efficient, very safe. So we talked about the points, but the other point is how much debt do we have? Fortunately enough, we actually haven't increased our credit card debt much over time. So even from the 1980s, we actually, relative to our housing debt, it's actually not a bad story there. So people are keeping their credit card debt pretty much under control. And relative to our housing debt, and relative to the rest of the world, we're actually not too bad either. So the big people in Sweden are the ones who got a lot of credit card debt for some reason. But we're really in line with most other countries as far as our credit card debt. The key thing to remember, of course, is you're not to get running up and not have the income to pay for it. Most people, I guess, here know their budgets pretty well. One of the things I find for people who first come into the workforce is using credit cards is a bit of a trap, because if we go back to the days when we used to get paid with an envelope, and you'd have your dollars and notes and coin in that envelope when you went to the pay office, would come around and pay you every fortnight. Most young people wouldn't know that, but you had a budget effectively in that pay slip because you actually physically had notes and coin in your pocket for that 2-week period. So in fact, what you really were doing when you got that pay slip was a stop sign that says if you got $150 for the fortnight, you had $150 to spend. Of course, with credit cards, you can get a credit card for 3 or 4 times your salary. And obviously there's no stop signs on your credit card. And so we're losing that little bit of connection back to the physical notes and coin that we used to have, 50 years ago before credit cards came in. So there is an issue about people, some people going off the deep end on credit cards. People go away on holidays in January. The kids got to go to school the next month. They've already had Christmas where they've spent a little bit extra on presents and going out for dinners and all those extra things. And then they go for a holiday, so they spend extra there. Then they come back and the school kids have got to get all their uniforms, their stationery. So you can understand why some people when they've got kids in debts really start to find that they're running up their credit cards. But for most people, most people will keep it under control. But just here is analysis of just saying, if you had a credit card and just paid off the minimum, the bank's going to do pretty well out of it because it'll take roughly about 24 years to pay it back. Obviously, there's a lot of money in credit cards because obviously interest rates are very high if you don't pay your interest rate back. This is the GE Money one, which if you remember a few years ago, they were advertising that they would take over your credit card and have 6 months interest free. And what they were really collecting was people who had high lots of credit card debt. They'd put it on their credit card, and then after 6 months, so these people were paying 23% interest. So not a good deal for those people who've run up a debt. Obviously, most people who run up a fair bit of debt obviously should go back and then put it on their home loan or get a personal loan so they can get rid of it quicker. So the only thing is, the Visa and MasterCard are very profitable businesses. You'll actually have in your international portfolio Visa and MasterCard, the company, because they're one of the top 500 companies in the world. So as long as you're not running too much on the credit card, you're doing well out of credit cards. So they're a good way of paying for things. They've been around a long time, but obviously make sure you just pay it off at the end of the month. But there's a lot of other new technologies coming in, and this is where online shopping has been around for a few years now, say 10 to 15 years. Obviously people have had all their own experiences where they've gone onto a fake website and bought, paid for a hotel. We had some friends who went onto the website, they wanted to go to New York, so they went onto the hotels in New York, paid the money, turned up at the hotel in New York. They said, no, we haven't got a record of what you've said. They had a printout of saying we booked into this hotel, physical. It was a physical hotel of the name and on that address, but it was a fake website, so they paid $2,000 or something for a way into a fake website. You get identity theft, obviously, computer hacking on your. I've had another client who had a person from Telstra ring up and said, "Oh, you've got a problem with the computer," and she said, "Yes." How'd you know that? And she then opened up the computer, and somehow $20,000 went out of her bank account. She doesn't know how it happened, and she's pretty bright. She's not silly, but she just said, "Oh." I don't know how they do it, but they're obviously, once they got into the computer, they can then they were able to access a bank account. Now, how they got into the computer once she opened it up, I'm not sure, but they must have had, I'm not sure how they did it. But anyway, $20,000 gone, so it does happen. Credit card details, well, that's one where you often find that you'll start buying things in China all of a sudden, and you ring up the bank and get your credit card cancelled. There's actually, and it's quite easy to do, because when you've got a credit card, you've got a random number of numbers on here. So all the person needs to do is to run those numbers randomly and keep trying to buy something until they get the number, and then your expiry date, they all line up with your credit card. So that's not difficult, that's just a random number generation system. And of course, if the retailer agrees to it, there's no problem. So if you're buying on the internet, they're only taking credit card details and so forth. So that's not difficult. The difficult thing is then obviously getting the refund back from the bank. But that's usually pretty standard, because the retailer has to prove that you were the person who bought that item. And normally that gets refunded but within a few weeks. Credit cards, So they're pretty much the big risks with credit cards, but as I said, there's really the new concept is to be able to use your iPhone to pay for things. And that's through your banking apps on your mobile. So, not that I've gone on to using banking apps yet, but the other thing is you can then look at your other investments, your superannuation, share portfolios, term deposits. We haven't got North on there yet, so we haven't gone that far, but you can go into your own home computer and then check on North if you ever want to. But you can also obviously transfer money between your bank accounts, you can pay people from your bank account. So yeah, the computers are now giving you that next step where in the past you only knew what was in your bank account when you got your bank statement every month. You didn't know if you'd spent too much or your wife had spent something and you'd spent something and you didn't have it all reconciled. So now you can keep up to date daily, monthly, weekly, or even during the day if you ever want to. So now coming to, this is just one of the systems of trying to keep track of your spending. And as I said, now we don't have the physical concept of no money in your wallet, therefore I'll stop spending. This is something the Australian Securities Commission, I think, yeah, they've created a track spend. Obviously you'd have to put in everything you spent during the day to get an idea of what you're spending. I know Commonwealth Bank's brought out a system of trying, it's a track spender as well, which they've been helping out, you know, to help people sort of keep an eye on their budget. Some places like Uber don't use anything except the app to pay for prepayment for their services. So you'd have to have your app before you could actually app set up with your credit card details on it before you can actually order a Uber service. So that's one way of jumping the system, so you don't even need your credit card. So that's not a bad concept. Okay, so then you've got using your app to buy things, buy and sell the Bitcoin. So in this case, obviously we're coming on to Bitcoin now, but obviously there's a number of ways to buy Bitcoin. This is one way through the app. If you put your app on there, and then you can buy them. You can also transfer money between your bank accounts. And then there's the Fitbit option. Now you have to have this version of Fitbit. It's not on every version, but here the fellows paying for things on these tap and go. I'm not sure if it's got a minimum maximum on it, but yeah, it's potentially an easier way to even avoiding having to have a mobile phone with you. And they can have up to six credit cards on there. So Apple Pay, that's another system. Linked to your credit card. You can use your fingerprints and facial recognition to before you can pay. So that's getting it to a very high level of security, because you can't just have someone, even if they steal your phone, get into it, they still can't pay for things in this system. Even there's iris recognition potentially that's coming through, or heartbeat analysis, or vein mapping. So I don't know what vein mapping is, but I guess it's the back of your hands or something like that. So even then, there's another high level of security on these things. And most people are used to having security where you do a transaction and then you get a code, and then you put that code back into the banking system before the transaction goes ahead. So there's a lot of ways that potentially in the future we'll be using our transactions apart from cash and credit cards. Probably checks will die a natural death in the next 12 months, but there's going to be a lot more efficient and safer ways of doing your normal transactions. But the only question is whether you might run up a lot more debt now. But I don't think so, because in fact if you've got your app there, it'll actually tell you when you've got to start to hit the maximum, and you can also track it more easily on your app as well. So probably any questions there? I don't think it's all pretty simple in sense of how it is going to evolve, and everyone will get better at it as we go along. I was just checking with my mobile phone the other day, and there's a wallet app on there which just came with an iPhone. And what the system there does is you actually photograph your credit card, and if one of the banks that you bank with, and it's only ANZ at this stage, if one of the banks, and a lot of the smaller banks are doing this with Suncorp, the Rock Bank, Newcastle Bank, that you can actually use, you photograph your credit card, that goes into the system, and then you can use that as your wallet. So it's a similar concept where you use that, once it's in your wallet, you then can use that to swipe for whatever purchase you want. But the three other banks, Commonwealth National and Westpac, haven't got onto the system. There's a bit of a dispute with Apple on that, and the banks have, only ANZ conceded to whatever requirements they had. So that's something that's, if you have a look at your apps on your mobile phones, you'll see a wallet already in there. It's just standard when you get the mobile phone. So now Bitcoin. So that's the next jump. You know, it's the alternative to using your dollars and cents in Australian dollars and cents or US currency, whatever currency you want. This is the next type of international currency. So there's a lot more than Bitcoin out there, and there's something like 1,200 of these currencies, and I understand, I read somewhere there's 1,000 new ones being created each week. I'm not sure if that's correct, but there's a lot of people have got this idea, okay, well we'll try and make the next new currency, because we'll talk about Bitcoin in a minute, but Bitcoin's basically not going to satisfy our needs. So a lot of currencies out there. You really got to know what you're doing a bit with the computers to get into it. It's not valued in any way to the economic health of the country. When we have Australian dollars and we value it against the US currency, it says that our production, our wealth, is valued relative to the US currency by the amount of currency we've got in the system, and therefore it's a value that's backed by the economic health of the country. If you had a country like Venezuela, where your economic activity's gone down to, by 80% or something like that, the wealth of that country's currency goes to nothing. And that's what's happened over there. There's some major problems in Venezuela and in Zimbabwe as well. So why is cryptocurrencies becoming acceptable is because there's a few issues. Some people want to avoid tax. Some people want to use it for money laundering of drug money. And other people want to avoid using, getting conversion rates for currencies. You always got to pay a fee to convert currency. So there's a few demand points in this aim for a cryptocurrency, but the key thing is it's going to pick up for the average person. Now, the whole thing that drives it is something called a blockchain, and all that means is it's a public register of all the transactions that you can trace back for your Bitcoin, that when you're Bitcoin or whatever transaction you want to do. The main thing is that because it's a public register, it's self-checking in the sense that you can check the transactions before you buy that currency, so you know it's going to be a real Bitcoin. I think that's basically it, isn't it, Alex? Our computer guy here who knows about these things is going to correct me if I'm wrong. But basically what we're trying to do is have a public ledger so you're not going to get defrauded, because that's one of the issues of one of these currencies. How do you know you're buying something that's got any value? You can buy it through an ATM. You can buy, I understand there's an ATM in Civic where you can buy Bitcoin. And there's also, you can buy it obviously through your mobile phone. But it doesn't get any backing by the central bank, like our currency is backed by the central bank. It's got a rougher value of one Bitcoin to $11,000. Now, obviously, to buy something with $11,000, you've got to have a part of a Bitcoin if you're going to buy a sandwich or a new car or whatever it's going to be. But the key thing is it's got a limited number of Bitcoins out there. And I don't know why they're limited to that, but it's really like saying that you've got a stone, and I'm going to show you that in my next exhibit. this is a stone, let's assume, and let's say we break it up into 21 million pieces, and we say it's got some value. Now this stone has no value, and neither does Bitcoin unless somebody buys it. So it's really a concept of what is value. When it started off, it had a very low value of 1 cent, I think it was. Was it 1 cent? So it's now worth $11,000. So why has it gone up in value? Well, it's saying that if I can convince everyone in this room that if I break up that stone into 21 million pieces and there's enough buyers and no many sellers, it will go up in price. It's just normal economics. So really Bitcoin's a concept that, okay, there's a few demand through money laundering, people who want to go avoid tax, and people who want to reduce currency costs of moving between currencies. But for the average person, it's not got really much interest. Because you can't buy your sandwich down the road, you can't buy a car with it, you can't do much with it. So why has it got a value of $11,000? It's because there's just this interest now, and it's going to be, I'm going to talk about that, is it because you've got a lot of people are saying it's got value, therefore other people see the value go up, and it's really just it's a Ponzi scheme basically. So we'll come and talk about that now. So apart from Bitcoin, a lot of other different digital currencies out there, but we'll talk about the Bitcoin first. Now, if you buy a Bitcoin, you have to do it through an exchange, just like if you're buying a share. Now, you've got to, so you've got to, oops, there we go. There we go. So you then convert your currency, Australian dollar, back into a Bitcoin. You might get only a fraction of a Bitcoin with your money, because obviously you're not going to throw $11,000 at to buy one. Or you can go to a Bitcoin broker, so that's another way of doing it. Or as I said, there's an ATM in Civic, I think, somewhere. So the whole thing has been created by supposedly an Australian, which is surprising, but anyway, that's the way. But that's the latest theory at this stage. But it goes back to 2009, and it was set up to be a system of electronic transfers with trust. Now we're coming back to this blockchain concept, that the blockchain gives you the concept that you can trace back the ownership of these bitcoins. A few years ago, somebody bought a pizza with two pizzas with some bitcoins, which are now worth $220 million, and this is showing you how crazy it's gone. It's just a piece of stone, really, if you think about it, that's now got a lot of value. It's only as safe as a computer, and there's no central authority checking it as checking the system. And a lot of people try to hack into the systems to steal it. It's not a very good algorithm to actually be processed. So the problem with it is that it only transacts about 7 transactions a second. So it's never going to be a normal day-to-day currency in this book. And it's also very volatile in price because it's been up and down many times. So we'll look at that in a minute. But yes, your digital wallet is protected by a password, and there's been $1.6 billion already stolen because people have been able to hack into the passwords. So obviously, some of the people have got password 123, or probably that was the hackers are running through a whole range of passwords and seeing what they can get. It's obviously been driven by probably the black market and drug money. And in 2018, this year, we've had a currency hack of 670 million, not in Bitcoin, but another currency coin check, because they didn't have their security systems up to date. And this poor man looks like he's going to do hurry curry in a minute, but he's not very happy because his whole office has been in disrepute. But it just goes to show that there's people out there who are out there trying to hack into these things, and so it has a lot of security issues. And even Handy and Amish bought some the other day, and then they forgot the password. So So even some smart people don't even know what they're doing. But there are some people who accept it. Now, I don't know how many people are accepting these things, but the amount of transactions they're doing, there's probably going to be a few, maybe on things like Xbox or PlayStations, but I can't see too many people using Bitcoin to buy their beer at the Sydney pub or buying a Subway. But it is anonymous, so that's one of the advantages for drug money and things like that. And then you've got this concept that you don't know what the value is, because you could use your Bitcoin to buy something and find that it's gone up in value next year or next month to your own detriment. So that was where somebody bought, used 0.04 of a Bitcoin, which is now worth $207 to buy a $5 Subway. So if you come and think about it, we have a value. There's concepts of what is money. Money has to be a medium of exchange. So we talked about when you bartered things, you would want to barter with currency that has a value that everyone accepts. So everyone accepts Australian dollars in Australia. It has to have a store of value. Now it has a store of value, but the value is very volatile. It has units of account, but they get broken up all the time, because what happens is something called Bitcoin mining, where you actually have to keep breaking up these units to be able to issue more to people. Because as people buy more, you need to have more being issued. So because you only got 21 million, but you still need to be able to break it up into smaller parts. And you've got to have everyone accepting it. So there's an issue there. If people won't use it to buy things from you, well, you're stuck. So this thing called Bitcoin mining is where they basically break up the Bitcoins into smaller bits. It uses a lot of electricity, because you've got this blockchain of all these transactions going back and back and back. And so the more transactions happen, you've got more and more transactions to go through before you can actually get your transaction done, basically. So this is a small way of breaking up the Bitcoins into smaller amounts. This is just a domestic one. And then you get huge warehouses full of these Bitcoin mining operations to break up the system. So basically, what it means is the algorithm is very inefficient. Okay, we've seen huge volatility, up and down, a huge Ponzi scheme, because it was roughly worth nothing in 2009. So as I said, it's like having a brick and then breaking up 20 million pieces and saying it's got value and convincing enough people to do it. And there's people out there who'll buy something that's going up in price. It's very simple. When you start to see this escalation, you've got this momentum of people saying, well, buy in now. That was back in June, it was $2,600. Now it's $11,000. Well, you've got this momentum. And going through, the price started at 0.003 cents. So huge capital gain if you bought in early. And it's been up to $19,500. But again, it's just a piece of, it's a concept that you're buying that hopefully has a value. And currently it's around about $11,000, but there's other ones that are out there as well who've gone up hugely in price. Oops, where we go? Hugely in price. These are other types of cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin is actually one of the smaller growths in value. Others have gone up 10,000 times. And this Ripple one is actually a bank-developed one, so that might be one that's going to come through. So here we have alternative ways of spending your Bitcoin is Uber. This is an alternative concept. So what I'm saying, why has Bitcoin become popular is because people have got used to seeing alternatives to hotels, Airbnb, alternatives to taxi, Uber, alternatives to travel agents, Trivago, or whatever. So we've now sort of in our psyche, one of the reasons why it has become popular is because we're thinking this is the new currency. We won't need our dollars and coins. And if it goes up in value all the time, well, that's good as well. But really, I think it's come back through these new concepts through the internet age that we've been challenged, whole industries have been challenged by things like the internet now, that you can order your overseas trip online, you can order your hotel online, you can get a taxi online, and bypass the traditional mechanisms to do it. So it has been popular because it avoids being tracked by governments, if you want to avoid that, and it's also it's got a trust because it's online. Now that's one, because some people don't trust banks, I guess, and some people like the fact that it's disrupting the normal economy. So the hysteria of it seeing going from 0.003 cents to now, well, up to 90,000 now back, is really it's really the normal thing that you see with a get quick scheme. Obviously, younger people are onto this more than our generation, but it's really an expectation that you'll make some easy money. Some people are selling their houses or borrowing money to get into it, because obviously if you see easy money, everyone wants to get into it. There's ATMs in Sydney where you can do it as well as Canberra, and buying cryptocurrency. And of course the transaction, the trek from nothing to something, all people are doing is projecting that that's going to keep going up in value. Well, it eventually will be a point where I think the governments will ban it, or banks won't allow you to transfer, or actually do the transaction to buy it. That's where there's a number of points where it can be cut off and there'll be no buyers. And when you get no buyers, then the value is zero. So that's where potentially it could end up. So investors love things that go up, the excitement, the thrill, euphoria, and then if it starts to go down, then you get people wanting to sell. And that happens in the share market, as we know. That's the normal share markets cycle. And I'm saying this is going to be the same thing for the Bitcoin, at least. A lot of people are buying it because they think, oh, well, if they don't buy it now, it'll go up and I'll miss out. People are not really researching how this works. They don't really know how it works. And they think that if their friends have made money out of it, they're going to make money out of it. So euphoria will eventually come back to a reality. I think that either governments could step in and stop it, or the natural cycle will go through where people realise they can't use it for anything. So we've had these sort of things before. The Dutch tulip bubble was one example, where the tulips, you probably know, come from Turkey, and they were introduced into Holland, and they became a great rage in the 1600s to buy tulips, because the price went up and up. Eventually it came to the price of red tulips went up to 6 times a person's average wage. So crazy things were happening, people selling their properties, encouraging their friends to buy it. And of course, while you've got plenty of buyers, it's still going to go up in price. It doesn't matter what the thing is. It could be 21 million pieces of that stone, or it could be a Dutch bulb. It really doesn't matter. They both have very little value. And so tulip mania is an example. Well, it's used now to explain these sort of manias where you get people buying into just this hysteria. So will it happen with currencies? These currencies I think it will with Bitcoin, because it's not really a currency that will long term, because it's too inefficient. If you're only going to do 7 transactions a second, you're not going to get millions of transactions through it. It also is very expensive for electricity to run it all. And thinking that that's going to be a problem for just the cost of it. But there's other cryptocurrencies out there. We don't know if they'll catch on. But in the terms of major bubbles, it's one of the biggest at this stage. So obviously other people have made money out of it. If you know these brothers, they were actually knew the guy, the Facebook guy at university. So they were featured in the film about Facebook. The guy who runs Facebook, Zuckerberg. Anyway, they've got into it, made some money. Obviously, whether it's still worth anything in 2 years' time is going to be interesting. And just to give you an idea, even though we know a bit about gold has some value because you can use it for jewellery. You can use it in electronics because gold is the finest thread you can make in any metal. So it has uses in electronics, but Bitcoin has no use. But it's obviously a lot more up and down in the last 2 or 3 years. Gold is a volatile commodity, but nowhere near that of the Bitcoin. So it produces no income, produces no dividends. It's impossible to value. It has great volatility, and there's no government legitimacy to it. So I guess eventually governments will come in and regulate it out of business, and you could lose it just by being hacked on the internet. And as I said, it's very unstable, so it's very hard for you to go down and buy something with it because you don't really know what the price you're paying, because the price is going up so much. And there's only so many people at this stage who will actually accept it. We talked about electricity. It takes a lot of electricity, and as I said, it only takes 7 transactions a second. So a lot of negatives, but it's not the only cryptocurrency out there. As I said, the banks could ban it for all cryptocurrencies. They could be banned by banks or could be banned by governments. So there's a few pressure points where it won't, where all these things can come up to zero. And of course, it could be used by people who want to avoid tax. Now, that's another reason why the governments have got an incentive to get on top of it. But if you do put money into a cryptocurrency of any form, you've still got to pay tax on it. If you make a capital gain, if you sell it, buy it and sell it, you make a capital gain, you've still got to put that on your tax return. Now the ATO has obviously got to find out that you've done this, but they obviously can see, they keep a check on people who get unusual amounts of wealth very quickly. Things like large amounts going through your bank account, if you have a very low income, because they know your income from your tax return. If you get a large lump of money going through your bank account that's unexplained, because most people are going to be, there's only 2 things that when you get large lumps of money, it's when you sell a house or when you retire and get a lump sum of super. They know both of those transactions. If you just get a large lump of money coming in and you say, well, I had a big day at the races, well, that's not going to probably go to, the tax office eventually will be able to go into these cryptocurrencies and see where the transactions are coming from. So it's really one of those things that the ATO will be trying to get the people who are avoiding tax on them. And obviously they'll have to ramp up their systems to do it, but they've got some pretty smart people in the tax office to do that. There's a few countries already looking to regulate it, and if you do make money out of it, you've got to keep the records. And as I said, it could be a potential loss of GST revenue, because if you're transacting through Bitcoin to buy your goods and services, you're not paying GST. So the government's another incentive why they really want to get on top of it. But there's another cryptocurrency called Ripple, and that is being developed by overseas banks, because what they're trying to do is speed up the transactions of international currency. So if you transfer money from Australia to the US, it takes 4 days basically to go through the transaction, through the current systems. But the banks realise that this has still got potential for international transactions. So this is a system called Ripple, which it is a cryptocurrency, but it's going to be developed by the banks. So it'll be within the banking sector, it'll be recognised by all the banks, and that's probably going to be one cryptocurrency that'll get through the system, but you probably won't notice it because all it will do is speed up the transaction if you're doing overseas transactions. Because it'll be one of the back office computer systems. So a lot of faults with Bitcoin, probably won't get it, it'll probably eventually crash and burn. But as I said, there's a few others that are out there which have much more efficient computing systems, Ripple being probably the most likely to take off if it's going to be backed by banks. And they will continue to develop, and obviously this is early days. It's like the early days when you had your bank card, you didn't get a swipe system on your bank card. couldn't do tap and go. Bank cards and credit cards evolved over time. Over time, there might be other ways of doing transactions on cryptocurrencies through stock exchanges, but I won't go into that. It's going to be a bit more like where you could bet against the value of cryptocurrency, but that's a long way away. But the key thing is that cryptocurrencies are a new concept. It's really about how it's going to evolve. Don't really know how it's going to evolve, but the key thing here is that a lot of people got some very smart people got some ideas about it. This is Al Gore, who used to be vice president. He thinks it's pretty good. Richard Branson, who's an innovator in the aviation industry, reckons it's going to be a good idea. But there's other people who have probably a little bit more knowledge than those about computing. Says he thinks it's a good idea having digital currency, but he doesn't like the idea that's anonymous. And obviously the abuses that go with it, tax avoidance and so forth. Head of the Deutsche Bank says he doesn't think it's a good idea, and it's a speculation. It's really it's worse than gold, so it's a very speculative investment. And our friend Warren Buffett says he wouldn't invest in it because it's going to end badly, and I think that's right. It's not, certainly Bitcoin's not going to get there. Some of the other currencies may, but that's to be determined. But for most people in the professional financial industry, we are not investing in any Bitcoin. We'll never invest in it because it's not a recognised currency. So that's our chief economist telling us that we're not going to do anything on that one. So you can if you hear it crash and burn and disappear, you don't need to worry. So I think that's pretty much it. But I know it's a very big topic and it's a lot of new concepts out there for people. But for most people in this room, it's not going to affect you from a day-to-day point. But at the end of the day, at least you know a bit about what they're talking about, and you have something to keep your mind on. But it's not going to be overnight. We'll be using this to pay for our goods and services. So Rob, listen.
So I've done the right thing by deleting all those invites I've had to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, you haven't lost your fortune. No, that's right.
This morning I was offered $1,300 worth.
All right.
Yes.
It could be just a scam too. I mean, obviously, you don't know who it is
that's right.
offering you these Bitcoins. Yeah. Unless you can go back and check it all up as far as what the pub register.
Yeah.
So Richard, yeah.
Well, your privilege, I've never had that offer made to me.
Yeah, obviously you're richer than most people.
The question is, the 21 million Bitcoins that exist, is there any provision within that Bitcoin sort of blockchain system to expand the number of Bitcoins? And if so, who controls or how is that controlled?
Yeah. Alex?
No, so they can't increase the number, but it is being divvied up into fractions of a Bitcoin as well. So one Bitcoin would still be worth one Bitcoin, but as the value's gone up and up and up, the developers behind the algorithm have recognised that obviously you can't have a currency that's worth $11,000 to buy milk, sort of thing.
So did they decide on the 21 million?
Initially, it was the whole Bitcoin phenomenon was just a concept originally that just took off. So it's I don't think it was ever planned for real world use, but it has seen such interest that now people are trying to apply it for real world use. And I agree with pretty much everything Russell said. It's not going to happen. Bitcoin is going to be a flop. However, the technology that it relies on, blockchain technology, I do personally see that as a future. So other cryptocurrencies might be developed that do become successful, and it could become a recognised currency within a government at some point in the future, but not yet. Not yet. But to answer your question, they can't add anymore. No.
Cool. Yeah, so
Russell, on the ABC News now, when they give you all the
price of
yes, that's sort of given it a bit of legitimacy.
that has, I noticed they haven't been doing it recently, but because it was as you say, you're thinking, why would they
Yeah, I mean,
promote this because as a concept? Because it's
Yeah.
so one so alien and basically it's got makes huge flaws to it. And thinking the ABC might be promoting it in a way because of their normally considered to be a reliable source of information. But as I said, I just recently noticed in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I
That it's not there.
haven't quoted it, and it's probably a reason for that is they
Okay.
don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, when you see it come up with all the other share indexes.
Yeah, if you set it
looks
next to the
quite
Australian dollar,
legitimate.
the US dollar, I think, well, that must be a legitimate currency.
Yeah.
Why haven't government stepped in sooner if it's being used so much for criminal activity?
There's no proof of that, but the anonymity, you don't know how much, because it's anonymous, you don't know how many people are using it illegally, but I think it's more that the average person is thinking, it's a bit like a day at the races, we'll put in $1,000 and see if it goes up and we'll hopefully sell it, but I don't, eventually governments will obviously get onto it because they'll see there's a leakage of money out of the economy and a way of either tax avoidance or money laundering. So I think that, even if there's only 3 or 4% of people in money laundering or tax evading, it's still enough for the governments to be concerned.
It'd be hard for governments to regulate it though, wouldn't it?
Well, through the banking system, because you've got to convert your money into Bitcoin. So whether you, that's my understanding how you do it. Because your servers, I guess, from your point of view, Alex, everyone who provides internet services would have a system of checking on the Bitcoin transactions, could they? Or?
It would be very difficult to do. A Bitcoin wallet is anonymous, anyone can set one up without any background checks. The only way that someone would know which wallet belongs to who is if you advertise, this is my wallet number. Otherwise it's never going to happen. It's also all encrypted, so the processing power behind trying to work out who's doing what, if you're an ISP provider and you're trying to track your customers who might be using Bitcoin, so the processing power would be
Enormous.
thoroughly unfeasible.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Doug,
Does the Bitcoin has a universal value? Can you explain mining? If you are on following different lines of mining.
Well, it depends on what you mean.
Within the Bitcoin, you can have Bitcoin that are different.
Well, you've got two concepts really. You've got when you buy it, essentially that's your price. Obviously, like any market, the price is going up and down. So you can check it on. Obviously, you can check it every day on every minute on what the real price is. So you've really got those two concepts separated, like any transaction, like any commodity. But what you're saying is,
So is Bitcoin the de facto currency to buy into other cryptocurrencies?
no, it's independent. Yeah. You can't use Bitcoin to buy another cryptocurrency. No.
So where does the money go?
Well, it goes
you've got
to the other seller. See, the seller gets the
He's
money.
got the
the buyer
Bitcoin, and he's bought it
gets the
from
crypto.
someone.
Yeah. So he gets a bit of the stone. Supposedly it's got the value, but at the end of the day, the person who's sold it, hopefully they've bought it at a cheap price and sold it at a dear price.
But that's a circular argument.
Well, it's all a bit like futures currency, futures
The,
exchange. If you ever
Bitcoins are created, certainly Bitcoin are created by the mining process, so I just have to...
go ahead.
So mining is the process of verifying transactions around the world. Anyone with a computer can get in on mining. Essentially you're connecting your computer to, think of it as the back end of the bank, and you can help verify that all these transactions are genuine, no one's hacking the system, all the algorithms and encryption adds up the way it should. And for dedicating your computing and electricity to that process, you get paid in Bitcoin, and that's the process that creates the Bitcoin. It's that initial payment. So that's how it's all started. It's we went in whiteboard.
Yes.
Sounds like some people have got a bigger, huge amount of nothing.
Well, it's effectively you're buying air, but
So initially,
It's a ghost.
Bitcoin could be created with a mining rig. So this one that's up on the board now, that's all components that anyone could just duck down the fish we can buy now at a computer shop and set up. That's just off-the-shelf components, nothing fancy. However, the way that Bitcoin mining works is as more and more Bitcoin is released by the mining process, the reward that you get for contributing to the mining starts to decrease obviously, if everyone was just getting paid the same amount all the time, you'd eventually hit 21 million, and then there's no one.
Worth nothing.
That's right. There's no one to process transactions anymore because they're not getting paid. So over time, the amount of electricity these things use to create Bitcoin has become so high that it's not worth the payments that you receive. But if you just hop to the next one, you now get these people that have bought these very specific computers. So your average computer, as everyone would know, can... your average computer, you can do all sorts of things. You can browse the internet, word process, play games, etc. Or you can set up a small mining rig on your bookshelf like I personally have at home. However, these ASIC miners are designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to mine cryptocurrencies. And they do it extremely efficiently and extremely well. Which is why you've ended up with tycoons like this person, who I don't know who that is, who are filling entire warehouses with them now to try and process these currencies and create Bitcoin and generate wealth.
The 2 employees in Bong.
So,
The 2 employees
Yes.
in Bong.
there is, I do wonder, they'll probably be in more trouble for installing a piece of software on a government computer without authorization, especially one that, people are scared of right now. They'll probably breach their own terms of employment by doing that, I'd say.
When it said those 2 twins, they made all that money. So how did they convert this Bitcoin, which is just a thing in the air? Did they convert that into dollars and cents? How did they do that?
I don't know their story personally. I assume they've approached a broker or an exchange and just invest. They can transfer money via BPay or the equivalent of a BPay system.
But they were able to turn their Bitcoin into dollars and cents.
That's right. Yeah. So you can purchase Bitcoin, which they've done. I'd say they've just sat on the Bitcoin, which is then increased in value by 10,000%, and then they've sold it all again through their exchange, and they've converted it back to regular fiat currency.
Well, that's nice if you could do it. But yes.
Yes, there was a segment on one of the TV about a couple of fellows in WA, and they apparently had started up a Bitcoin whatever, and they had some heavies going out trying to sell them.
Right.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of that. So they created their own
Yeah.
currency, did they? Yeah. It is. It's interesting days for cryptocurrencies. As I said, Bitcoin is the first one. There's a lot of problems with Bitcoin. There's a lot of other software developers who are trying to introduce their own currencies, generate wealth with those, but a lot of the new cryptocurrencies are failing as well. So it's, I was saying to Russell, the technology, the blockchain technology behind Bitcoin and a lot of the other cryptocurrencies, I think is solid. It is early days. Some people are calling it Internet 2.0. It's got a lot of refining to be done. But whilst Bitcoin is very highly speculative and most likely going to die, it could be the case that in 50 years' time, the Australian dollar could be running on its own blockchain technology somehow. As I said, it's early days. You should think of Bitcoin like the very first car made by Mercedes in 1876, whatever it was. A lot of refinements happened since then, and that's what's going to happen with cryptocurrencies, I think. But I believe the official standpoint we have to say today is it's bad. Bitcoin is bad, highly speculative, highly risky. Yeah, don't invest any money unless you think of it as gambling as opposed to an investment. It's definitely.
I don't feel so silly about not understanding it.
It's very new. Yeah, it's new stuff.
The people, sorry,
Is it vital to have a private wallet to trade it, or can you leave it in the public wallet? Or is that a very
You can leave it in the public wallet, yeah. So, as Russell said, one of the biggest risks about Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrencies is the hacking concept. Too many people still have their pet's name as their passwords to things. It's easy to guess. In fact, not just cryptocurrency, but the vast majority of security breaches in any system is passwords being too easy to guess. But with cryptocurrency, you've got your wallets, certainly with Bitcoin and some of the other currencies, you've got your wallet key, which is just a random string of letters and numbers. And that's visible to everyone. They can all see the amount of money in there, what's gone in and out. But you also have a private key, which is not shared by anyone. And without that private key, nobody can access your funds. So what some people are doing, who are trying to see this as an investment, they'll create their wallet, transfer funds into the wallet, create their private key, or receive their private key, print it off, and put it in a physical safe so that it's offline and no one can hack it unless you break into the house and physically get into a safe. So that's the safest way to do things. But then if we're doing that, it starts to become less flexible, and there's problems with that too. So as I said, very early days.
Is the private wallet essentially just a portable hard drive?
It could be. No, a private wallet is also, it's another random string of letters and numbers. It's not visible to anyone, and that particular string of letters and numbers is what's necessary to access and use the fund. So you've got the two keys of letters and numbers, two strings of letters and numbers. One is the public one that everyone can see with all the transactions on it, and the other one is essentially the access key, so that's your password to it. And by removing that and having no digital copies of that and having it printed on a piece of paper and stored somewhere else, then it's pretty safe. Yeah.
But they sell private wallets for hundreds of dollars.
Oh, so you're talking about the physical? Yes, yes. So there are some, I see. So that's another way of doing it. There are some companies who make thumb drives that are encrypted that you can store your Bitcoin private keys on those thumb drives with encryption. And in order to access the funds, you need to have that physical hard drive or physical thumb drive. That's right. Yeah. So that is they are fairly safe, except there have been instances of people, Chinese hackers, some that come out of China that are essentially fake versions, and they look genuine. People transfer all their money into these fake wallets, and then they get stolen off the thumb drive as well. So it's, as right at the start, as was in the slideshow, you've got to sort of understand all the risks and know the technology.
Would pouring $14 million into it force the price up? Make
Yes.
people think, wow.
That's a lot of the reason that the price is fluctuating so much at the moment. It's just people buying and selling and speculative investment, and then it goes up, and then someone who's got $10 million worth just sells it all because they've made $10 million in a week, and then it forces the prices down.
Kept $14 million somehow.
Andrew, you have one?
Yeah, the people who have developed the algorithms, are they licensed? Are people making money out of licensing the algorithms for mining and the like?
Essentially, it's a lot of it's run on open source software. So open source software is unlike how to explain it. It's any program has a whole lot of code behind it. Private companies will typically lock up that code so you can't see it. An open source company will show that code to everyone and say, hey, check it out. If you find any problems with this, let us know. And that's how a lot of cryptocurrencies are working as well. So anyone can see how the algorithm works, which initially might appear to be a security risk as well. However, it hasn't been. The blockchain hasn't been. The Bitcoin blockchain hasn't been hacked once in 12 years or so. So there's more good and more bad. Apparently, yeah. So it's it's just open for anyone to see, and if you understand coding, you can check it out and verify that everyone's doing the right thing.
All good. I think everyone's answers to the questions, I think, at this stage. Yeah. So, well, thanks again for coming along, and